This Timothy Liljegren injury update is massive, and the Leafs need to make a change. We'll get into that later on in this episode, but before we start, I just wanted to say that 78.6% of you guys aren't subscribed, so if you're enjoying this daily NHL and Leafs content, make sure to go down and hit that subscribe button. But we'll hop straight into it, with the first topic being Timothy Liljegren's injury. If you watched the game last night, you do know that Timothy Liljegren did go down with an injury. Sheldon Keefe did come out to say that Timothy Liljegren will miss significant time. This came after Brad Marchand kind of can-opened Liljegren in the corners. We've seen him go hard into the boards, a lot of contact with his skate to the boards. And this is significant for the Leafs in not only the sense that we lose a guy like Liljegren, but the Leafs are currently battling so many injuries on the D-core. Most recently, we've seen a guy like Jake McCabe go down, and they're kind of struggling without these defensemen. So with Timothy Liljegren being out for an extended period of time, we're losing a top four defenseman, a guy that has showed promise throughout his years with the Leafs and has really taken this massive step. The big thing with this too, there was an article that had come out where Mark Masters did cover and said Keefe spoke to referee McCauley before the second period. He didn't see the stick go between his legs and canoped him to make him go feet first into the boards in the most dangerous area of the ice. He didn't see it. So, if many of you do know, Wes McCauley does have a little bit of a history with the Leafs of not calling a lot of calls, not calling a lot of penalties against the Leafs. I'm not saying this is just a situation of being biased against the Leafs, and I won't go into the history that has came out with McCauley and Sheldon Keefe, but I did just want to pull this up. You can see McCauley in the bottom left corner where Timothy Liljegren is getting can opener by a guy like Brad Marchand. So when you do go back and you look at this quote of him saying he didn't see him, and you do look at this picture, it's kind of hard to believe that this is a situation where he didn't see it, how there's no penalty called on the play. And this is just a massive blow for, like I said, the Leafs. Even Timothy Liljegren, the Leafs are having a game in Sweden where Liljegren would have been played in front of friends, family, friends. This was a big moment for him. Seeing this guy go down with an injury is just awful for the Leafs and him in this, it's a young defenseman with so much promise, like I said, and where the Leafs are kind of struggling on defense, battling these injuries. Seeing a guy go down like this is just awful for his game as well. We hope the best with him. I mean, we want to see this guy develop. We want to see him get better. But it does really just put a wrench in the Leafs' play a little bit, which brings us on to the second topic of the Leafs need to make a change. So this is in the sense of, you look at the Leafs defense right now without Timothy Liljegren in the lineup, and you're running a thing of Morgan Rielly, TJ Brodie, Mark Giordano, John Klingberg, Lagesson, Benoit. So when you do look at this in a nutshell, it's not awful in a pinch where you could play him for a couple of games, but currently we don't know how long Jake McCabe's going to be out, and Timmins. So when you do look at this, you do have two AHL guys, Lagesson, who did look good in his 2 games with the Leafs. When you do look at Benoit's in this situation where he didn't look great in the preseason. He currently has 2 AHL games under his belt. So you are kind of throwing this guy into a situation of maybe not being ready. He did play a lot of minutes and logged a lot of minutes when he did play for the Ducks last year in their top 4. So this is a guy that can play into your top 6 for sure. It's a guy that can fill in, eat minutes. He's a physical guy. I'm not talking bad on this guy. I think he's a great defenseman. But when you look at this as a full, it's just kind of a deep pairing that doesn't look amazing for a team that's kind of struggling out of the gates. You're looking at the situation of really relying on a guy like Klingberg to pick up his play. You're moving Giordano, who has been good this year, but is at the age of 40. And just in general, this is not a deep pairing that I want to run for a couple weeks, depending on how long McCabe is out. When McCabe does come back, you could run in the situation of Morgan Rielly, Brodie, McCabe, and Klingberg, which we haven't really seen work so far this season, and especially to start the year. And a guy like Lagesson, Giordano or Benoit. So you're kind of in the situation of, are the Leafs going to make this next big trade for a defenseman? Are they going to go look at a guy like Zadorov, Hanifin, or maybe a guy from San Jose, a team that's in the midst of having to rebuild? The Leafs really need to just kind of analyze what they have here, make a move, figure this out, because they can't really continue their play. And this is not just on the defense. We've seen a lot of newly acquired guys. John Klingberg, whose play hasn't been great so far. He looks good offensively. He does have flashes of defense. But overall, with his price tag being $4 million, it hasn't been satisfying fans. We did see last night was a big thing where John Klingberg made Marchand's life a little bit of a living hell. He was laying hits. He was kind of throwing him around, running his mouth. And this is the big problem where he was only really the guy that did it. We've seen Reeves kind of have his flashes on the bench where he'd run his mouth at Marchand. There we see situations where Domi and Bertuzzi would do the same. Bertuzzi, who only played 11 minutes because his play was so bad. But overall, these newly acquired guys haven't looked great on the Leafs so far. The Leafs do have a positive record. I believe it is 5-3-2 right now. But when you look at it as a whole, where this team coming into the season looked better than ever, this roster looked outstanding. They've been struggling. Minus Matthews' 6 goals in the first 2 games, which arguably could have been the game changing, where Montreal, the Leafs were down, Matthews scored his 2, which did bring them back. And just overall, the Leafs play hasn't looked outstanding. This is something you can maybe blame on some of the defensemen, the forwards. I know there's been a recent article came out that Tavares and Riley had a few quotes where they said, other teams you're playing, you need to kind of play up to them, learn to play their style. A lot of people were saying this was almost shots at Keefe. I don't buy into this too much, but if they ultimately are, maybe there's a coaching change coming. But just in general, something has to be done with this team. This is a team that has expectations to win a cup, win the President's Trophy, win the Atlantic. And so far, they've kind of looked mediocre. We've seen Marner kind of struggle. Obviously, the Leafs always have the situations where they kind of struggle in October, leading into November. But with this team looking for deep runs, looking for people to stop talking bad about them, and just ultimately get into the conversation of being a dynasty, trying to win multiple cups, bringing this core together, minus a few players, it hasn't looked amazing. We've seen Riley log 30 minutes. I think Riley has looked outstanding this season. Like I said, Matthews looked amazing. Nylander's on another level. Tavares has looked good. Nyes has looked good. Bertuzzi and Domi haven't looked great. I look at these guys of more of a playoff performers. These are guys you bring in to play gritty, hard-nosed hockey during the playoffs. A guy like Ryan Reeves hasn't looked outstanding so far. It kind of makes you think maybe the coach has told the guys to stop with these shenanigans on the ice. But you bring these players in for this. This is a situation where you bring in a guy like Reeves to throw a couple hits, fight, run his mouth, take a penalty when he needs to get the team motivated. And we haven't seen this so far. And it's hard to watch this in the sense of, like I said, there's so much expectations for this team. They ran back the core. This is year 5 or 6 now. And if things don't get fixed, I do see a situation where Brad Treliving does make a trade, if that's on defense, maybe for a new forward. I think the third line needs to be broke up. I think Kempf is an amazing player. But just kind of putting him in between a guy like Nyes and Domi, you want scoring out of this line. Kampf is not an incredible scorer. As I said, I do love David Kampf. I think he's a great forward-checking third or fourth line center. He's debatably our best face-off guy and debatably our best penalty killer. So this guy does have a need for this team. I think he has a great contract as a guy that we need, but he's more suited for a fourth line role. So maybe the Leafs do acquire on a third line center. Maybe they reach out for a guy like Lindholm and Zadorov in a mega blockbuster trade from Calgary. But just in general, something has to be done with this team. If it's the coaches, like I said, the forwards, the defensemen, something has to change. If that's the players finally step up, something happens. I think Samsonov had a good game last night. I don't think this loss was on him. Obviously, in the shootout, he didn't look outstanding, allowing 2 goals right away. But just in general, something has to give at some point on this team. But other than that, we'll get into everyone's favorite topic, which is comment of the day. The comment of the day does come from Hashu or Husso. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Rather look at a guy like Jan Ruda from San Jose and says Zadorov or Hanifin. Comes at a cheaper AAV with the playoff pedigree to boot. I think Ruda is a great guy. I think this is a guy we could definitely acquire. We did recently do a video on the San Jose Sharks where we kind of talked about a guy like Duclair, Hoffman, kind of coming in to help with the scoring. If you could package a deal like this and bring in a guy like Ruda just to kind of fill out this bottom pairing defense, maybe even slide him into the second pairing, I think he's a great fit. This is a guy that had playoff experience with Tampa. He's a bit of a big defenseman. He can lay hits. And like you said in this, he does have the playoff pedigree, which this team is kind of lacking. If you guys enjoy this episode, make sure to go down and leave a comment, like, subscribe. What's your guys' thoughts on this? Do you think this Liljegren injury was something that the refs should have had a look at? If it's something that a penalty should be called on, I definitely do. And what's your thoughts on the Leafs need to make a change? Do you think this is just me overreacting? Or do you think this is a situation that internally the Leafs do need to kind of tinker with this and do something to get this rut over with? Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this episode and take care.